You have to picture the scene to truly understand the level of absurdity I was dealing with. Standing there on my front porch at 6 a.m., clutching a mug of black coffee that had gone cold 10 minutes ago, watching a convoy of bulldozers rumble toward my cattle gate like a mechanical invasion force. Leading the charge wasn't a general, but a woman named Linda Sterling, stepping out of a pristine, white Mercedes G-Wagon that cost more than my tractor and my truck combined. Her heels clicking on the asphalt like she was walking a runway instead of a country road, waving a sheaf of court orders like they were a declaration of war. She thought she was staring down a broken, grieving rancher who had finally run out of fight. She thought she was about to level my legacy to protect the property value of her McMansion. But what Linda didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the farm she was attacking was a stage set, a 47-acre illusion I'd built to keep them busy while the real work happened in the shadows. Let me back up, because to understand why I let a suburban tyrant think she had won, you have to understand what this land means to me. My name is Caleb Hawthorne, and my family has been bleeding and sweating into this soil since 1948, raising cattle on the Hawthorne Legacy Ranch long before the first developer ever looked at our valley and saw dollar signs instead of wheat fields. But the heart of this ranch wasn't just the dirt or the livestock. It was my wife, Elena, who we lost to leukemia 2 years ago, a woman who could drive a combine harvester in a thunderstorm and still have the grace to sing in the church choir on Sundays. When she died, the silence in the house was so loud it felt like it was crushing my chest. So I poured everything I had left, every ounce of grief and rage, into the ranch, making sure the herd was fed, the fences were mended, and the legacy she loved didn't fade away into the history books. Then came Oakwood Heights. It popped up overnight like a bad rash on the edge of the old Miller wheat fields, a sprawling subdivision of cookie-cutter mansions with 3-car garages and homeowners associations that had rulebooks thicker than the Bible. Most of the folks moving in were fine, just families looking for a slice of the quiet life, escaping the city smog for clear stars and fresh air, but every paradise has a serpent, and ours was Linda Sterling. She was a former corporate litigator from the city who moved to the country but wanted to sanitize it, to strip away the manure and the mud and the noise until it was just a postcard view from her kitchen window. She lived 800 yards from my pasture, which apparently was too close for comfort, because the complaints started 3 weeks after her moving van pulled away. It started with a certified letter, heavy and ominous, claiming that the noxious odors from my livestock were creating a hostile living environment and depressing the market value of her investment. I remember laughing when I read it, thinking surely a judge would see that my ranch had been here since before her father was born, that I had agricultural exemptions older than the ink on her deed, but I underestimated Linda's need for control. She didn't want a compromise, she wanted a conquest. She dragged me into nuisance lawsuits, claiming my cattle, who are gentler than the golden retriever she keeps in her purse, were a noise hazard, causing her undue psychological distress. And she packed the town council meetings with Oakwood Heights residents who had never smelled fresh hay in their lives, spinning tales about groundwater contamination and safety hazards for their children. It was pure theater, a performance worthy of an Oscar, and while I stood there in my dusty boots trying to explain zoning laws to a room full of angry suburbanites, I could see the smirk on her face, the cold satisfaction of a predator playing with its food. The temporary restraining order was the first real blow, a gavel strike that forced a 500-foot buffer zone on my own property, effectively rendering a third of my best grazing land useless, forcing me to sell off 8 head of prime cattle at an emergency auction for pennies on the dollar, just watching $15,000 evaporate into thin air because Linda didn't like the view. The community started to fracture, split down the middle like a piece of dry firewood, with the old-timers at Miller's Supply slipping me free fencing wire and whispering encouragement while the newcomers avoided eye contact at the diner, terrified that being seen with me would put them on Linda's hit list. She launched a social media crusade, creating a Safe Neighborhoods page where she posted photos of my cows with captions that made them look like feral beasts, manipulating the narrative until even people I'd known for years started asking me if maybe I should think about modernizing my operation. But the moment I knew this was a fight for survival, not just a neighborly spat, was when she weaponized the bureaucracy against my grief. While I had been sitting in chemotherapy wards with Elena for 18 months, letting paperwork slide because saving my wife was more important than filing permits. Linda had been digging. She found that my septic system permit had expired during those long, agonizing months in the hospital, and she flagged it to the county health department on a Thursday afternoon, hitting me with a compliance order that gave me 30 days to install a commercial-grade system I didn't need and couldn't afford. It was an $18,000 bill landing on a bank account that was already drained by legal fees, a calculated strike designed to bankrupt me. I sat in my kitchen that night, the smell of stale toast and loneliness filling the air, realizing she wasn't just trying to stop the smell, she was trying to erase me. But my father, a man who could outthink a fox, always told me that if someone attacks you with the rulebook, you better make sure you read the footnotes. So, while Linda was sipping mimosas and celebrating her victory, I started spending my nights in the basement of the county records office, under the flickering fluorescent lights, with Mrs. Higgins, the clerk who remembered my grandfather, bringing me donuts and guiding me to the dusty filing cabinets that hadn't been opened since the Reagan administration. That's when the tide began to turn, subtly, quietly, in the dark corners of property law where Linda was too arrogant to look. I found her vulnerabilities. That beautiful stone wall she featured in Country Living magazine? It was 6 feet over the setback line, a clear code violation. Her landscape lighting that kept my cows awake. It violated the dark sky ordinance we passed 10 years ago. Her decorative koi pond? No environmental permit. I filed 3 counter complaints the next morning, meticulous and cold, and the sound of the clerk stamping those papers was the first note of my symphony of revenge. But the real twist, the moment the ground shifted beneath our feet, came 2 weeks later when Robert Sterling, Linda's husband, knocked on my door at twilight, looking like a man who was carrying the weight of the world in a backpack. He was sweating, shifting from foot to foot, and he whispered the truth that changed the entire battlefield. They were broke. They had leveraged everything, maxed out every credit line to buy that house in Oakwood Heights, and they were drowning in debt, terrified that if property values dipped even a fraction of a percent, the bank would take it all. Linda wasn't fighting for safety. She was fighting for financial survival, desperate to turn the neighborhood into a pristine, high-value asset to save her own skin. Desperation makes people dangerous, but it also makes them predictable. As Linda ramped up her attacks, calling in an anonymous IRS tip that triggered a grueling audit of my books, organizing senior citizens to file noise complaints about my morning feeding routines, I was digging deeper into the history of the land itself. Mrs. Higgins helped me unroll a territorial survey map from the 1890s, the paper brittle and smelling of old vanilla, and there it was, a detail so obscure that Linda's high-priced city lawyers had missed it completely. My grandfather hadn't just bought the surface rights to the Hawthorne land. He had retained the subsurface mineral rights for the entire valley, rights that extended directly underneath the foundation of every single house in Oakwood Heights. I wasn't just a rancher. Legally speaking, I was a mining operation waiting to happen, sitting on top of limestone deposits worth millions, with extraction rights that superseded residential zoning. While Linda was busy trying to ban my cows, I was quietly bringing in geologists under the cover of darkness, disguised as night security, confirming that I held the power to turn her subdivision into a quarry. But I couldn't play that card yet. I needed her to overextend, to commit fully to her own destruction. That's when the water started tasting like poison. It was a Tuesday when the tap water in my kitchen, usually crisp mountain spring water that tasted like melted snow, came out smelling like a swimming pool accident. I called the county inspector immediately, and what he found made my blood run cold. A dead raccoon floating in my sealed well, bloated and decomposing, which was impossible because a raccoon can't unlock a heavy steel well cap, screw it back on, and drown itself. Linda didn't miss a beat. She was on the local news that evening, claiming this was proof that my decrepit farm was a biohazard, threatening the groundwater of the entire Oakwood Heights community, looking deeply concerned for the cameras while I knew, deep in my gut, she was popping champagne behind closed doors. I had to truck in water at $200 a day, bleeding money I didn't have, but I remembered Elena's favorite saying, "The truth always comes out in the wash." I checked my trail cameras, hidden high in the pines, not the obvious ones near the barn. And there it was, grainy but undeniable black and white footage of Linda's teenage son, a kid named Kyle, prying open my well cap at 2 a.m. and dumping a jug of industrial bleach inside, followed by the raccoon carcass. It was a felony, plain and simple, intentional poisoning of a water source. I took the footage to Sheriff Boone, a man with hands like leather mitts and a patience that rivaled Job. He watched the video in silence, the only sound the hum of his office fan. And then he leaned back and gave me advice that defined the rest of this war. "We can arrest the kid now," he said, "and she'll spin it, get him a slap on the wrist, and claim you framed him. Or, Caleb, we let them swim a little longer. Let them think they're untouchable and catch the shark, not just the minnow." So I played the game. I invited Linda to a private meeting at the sheriff's station, watching her face crumble beneath the layers of foundation when I slid the photos across the metal table. I gave her an ultimatum: back off, or your son goes to juvie for a very long time. She agreed, trembling, promising peace, and for 3 weeks, silence fell over the valley. The cattle grazed, the diner chatter went back to football, and I almost let myself believe it was over. But a narcissist never retreats. They only reload. Linda used that ceasefire to research an obscure municipal code about commercial vehicle parking, and suddenly, my cattle trailer, which had been parked in the same spot since the Bush administration, was illegal. She forced me to rent storage 20 miles away, another monthly expense to drain the war chest. She formed the Valley Improvement Coalition, recruiting wealthy newcomers to fund a legal slush fund specifically designed to harass me out of existence. That's when I decided to vanish. The world thought I was retreating. I moved the visible herd, the 23 Angus cows she obsessed over, to a back pasture behind a ridge, leaving the front corrals empty. I let the barn paint peel a little. I let weeds grow around the front gate. To Linda and her spies, it looked like Caleb Hawthorne was finally breaking under the pressure, a dying rancher fading away. But the reality? The reality was that the Greenbelt Preservation Trust had stepped in. I had quietly signed a conservation easement with them years ago, and they weren't just tree huggers. They were legal pit bulls who specialized in protecting heritage farms from suburban overreach. They were reimbursing my legal fees, dollar for dollar. While Linda was bankrupting her family to sue me, I was fighting with an unlimited war chest funded by donors who hated people like her. And the ranch wasn't dying, it was thriving. I had moved the core operation to a 40-acre parcel I leased from the state adjacent to my land, hidden by dense pine forests, accessible by old logging roads Linda didn't know existed. I had backup generators, satellite internet, and a secondary water system. I was running a fully modern, profitable beef operation just 200 yards from her rose garden, and she didn't have a clue. The ranch she was attacking was a ghost, a decoy operation designed to absorb her blows while the real business hummed along in the dark. The universe has a dark sense of humor, though, because just as I was settling into this secret life, my surveyor, Atticus Reed, called me with a voice shaking with excitement. He had been using modern GPS to remap the property lines for the conservation easement, and he found a discrepancy in the 1952 survey. The fence line was wrong. It was off by 50 feet. Linda Sterling's prize-winning rose garden, her gazebo, the expensive retaining wall she built, they weren't on her property. They were sitting squarely on Hawthorne land. She was trespassing every time she watered her flowers. I held that card to my chest, feeling the heat of it, waiting for the perfect moment. Linda, meanwhile, decided to go nuclear. She filed a formal complaint with the EPA, alleging that my cattle runoff was creating a toxic watershed event comparable to an industrial spill. She falsified data. I found out later she literally made up the numbers in an Excel spreadsheet, claiming nitrogen levels were 400% above the legal limit. When the federal inspector showed up in a hazmat suit, looking like he was responding to a Chernobyl meltdown, my neighbors looked at me like I was a leper. The bank called, freezing my lines of credit. I walked through the grocery store and felt the burning stares of people who thought I was poisoning their water. I sat in my empty kitchen, the silence of the house screaming Elena's name, feeling the weight of the shame. It was the lowest moment of my life. But then, the EPA scientist, a tough-as-nails woman named Dr. Eris, finished her testing. She took off her mask, looked at me, and smiled. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, "your water is cleaner than what comes out of the tap at City Hall. And whoever filed this report committed a federal felony." That was the signal. It was time to spring the trap. The end didn't come with a whisper. It came with the roar of a town hall meeting packed so tight you couldn't slide a piece of paper between the bodies. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. A mix of expensive perfume from the Oakwood Heights faction and diesel fumes from the farmers who had come down from the hills to watch the show. Linda Sterling stood at the podium, looking haggard, her hair slightly askew, the manic energy of a woman who knows she's cornered but refuses to show her throat. She launched into a 20-minute diatribe about agricultural terrorism, painting me as an unhinged extremist who hated progress, her voice cracking as she begged the town council to condemn my property for the greater good. I sat in the front row, silent, my hands folded on a stack of files. When it was my turn, I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just walked to the microphone, hooked up my laptop to the projector, and let the truth do the heavy lifting. 18 months, I said, my voice echoing off the gym walls. For 18 months, this community has been torn apart by lies. Tonight, we look at the receipts. First, I played the video. The room gasped as they watched Kyle Sterling dumping bleach into my well, followed by footage of Linda herself cutting my fence wires at midnight. Footage captured by the high-definition cameras she didn't know I installed. I saw her face go pale, the blood draining away until she looked like a ghost. Then came the EPA report. Atticus Reed walked the council through the falsified data, explaining clearly that Linda had fabricated environmental hazards to weaponize the federal government against a private citizen. The federal prosecutor sitting in the back row stood up and nodded gravely, signaling that indictments were already being typed up. Then, the property lines. I threw the GPS survey on the screen, overlaying the true boundary over the satellite image of her backyard. Mrs. Sterling, I said, looking her dead in the eye, you've been suing me for trespassing on your census, while you have been physically trespassing on my land for 2 years. That rose garden? It's mine, and I'm reclaiming it. But the kill shot, the absolute final nail in the coffin, was the geology. I pulled up the 1890s mineral rights map. I explained that under Colorado law, mineral extraction rights dominate surface rights. I explained that I had legal standing to turn the ground underneath Oakwood Heights into an active limestone quarry, a project that would require indefinite environmental impact studies, effectively freezing every single property sale in the subdivision for decades. You wanted to destroy my property value? I asked the room, which was dead silent now. You just tried to destroy the wrong man. I own the ground beneath your feet. The aftermath was a landslide. Linda Sterling was arrested leaving the building, charged with environmental fraud, filing false police reports, and criminal mischief. The image of her in handcuffs, her designer blazer crumpled, was the end of her reign of terror. Robert filed for divorce 3 weeks later. They lost the house to foreclosure, and the bank took the Mercedes. But the victory wasn't just in her defeat. It was in the rebuilding. I used the settlement money, $143,000 in damages, to start the Elena Hawthorne Memorial Scholarship, funding veterinary school for kids who wanted to keep the agricultural tradition alive. The first recipient was Old Man Miller's granddaughter. The ranch is louder now, not with construction, but with life. The Decoy Gate is still there, a monument to the war we won, but behind it, the herd has doubled. The Greenbelt Trust helped me designate the land as a permanent agricultural heritage site, meaning no developer and no HOA can ever touch it again. Sometimes I walk the fence line at sunset, where the shadows stretch long across the grass, and I think about Linda. I think about the hubris of thinking you can buy a view and delete the history that created it. She wanted a sterilized world, a perfect picture with no soul. She didn't understand that you can't fight the land, and you certainly can't fight the people who are part of it. So I leave you with this question, the one that keeps me up some nights. When someone tries to bury you, not knowing you're a seed, how far are you justified in growing? Did I go too far by letting her destroy her own life? Or was this just the natural order of things, the predator becoming the prey? Let me know in the comments. And remember, never bring a homeowner's manual to a range war.